welcome to the first episode of Warrior Airman Podcast, a podcast that enriches the unity of the community within the 102nd Intelligence Wing. This is the place where airmen can foster relations built on our unique experiences. I am your host, Technical Sergeant Mandy Givens, and today we have the pleasure of having Master Sgt. Davis's company. Welcome, Sergeant Davis. Would you mind giving us a little bit of your background and kind of the positions you're holding right now?
So I've been in the wing since 2002, so about 18 years now. I used to be in a weapons troop on the F-15, and currently I'm a section chief, volunteer victim advocate, and I'm taking on a year role at Joint Force Headquarters doing enlisted force development, supporting the state command chief.
Wow, that's a lot of experience that you have behind your belt. And for that, I am appreciative of your time today. So you and I have had some sidebar conversations offline in regard to overactive mind and utilizing mindfulness. And today, I'm so grateful to have you here and actually elaborate upon these sidebar conversations that we've been having, because I think it's so important that everyone kind of gets a grasp on their ability to tackle mindfulness and being able to utilize it so that they're not struggling with either procrastination or just not being able to keep up with day-to-day tasks. So with your experience and even just with service, like how have you been able to kind of tackle your overactive mind, or like what are the things that you struggle with overactive mind? Let's start there.
Yeah, so this actually comes back to like a lot like when I was younger. I had a lot of ambition and a lot of not really like the training yet or the development maturity, basically you'd say, to just kind of jump into like having all that energy and having all that want and drive to get tasks accomplished. And also, starting off in the military, I was dealing with like a jet, and everything was a very standardized process, just like going to basic training. The place that you put the missile doesn't change. The methodology of loading a jet, that doesn't change. So there wasn't really a lot of room for that, aside from being faster at your job, more precise about doing everything exactly the same way, the right way every time. There wasn't a way to get past that. So I found myself definitely being a lot more physically active and just reading a lot during that time. And that was kind of quelling that overactive, needing something to do. As the unit, the wing kind of changed and went from a fighter wing to an intel wing, that kind of was able to facilitate, so now I have all these possibilities of avenues of what you can learn and how to focus in. It was almost like not a good case scenario, because they're really we were all coming into that as a wing together, and you really didn't have that focus of just look at this one thing. Once you really got good at your job, especially if you were really being attacking that and focusing on everything you could learn at that point when we first got into it, you really got kind of pigeonholed into that. And then we weren't at that point yet where we were gonna expand on developing people and having them take on new roles. So what I found is I just started in my head doing a lot of scenario based things, so if this happens or if that happens, and so my mind just it was all internal monologue. It wasn't I'm having conversations with people like crazy and
Right.
we're going down those rabbit holes. So what I found over time, for me, where it was basically, especially around now, is becoming a senior NCO and having to take on helping other people and develop them, was being able to take a lot of notes, start checklists, being able to let my mind rest and be okay, I wrote it down, so it's not something I'm gonna forget. It's not something that is imminent that I need to attack, and really prioritize. And I think that comes too with the development of all the different tech schools we go to, and airman development, NCO development, and so on. It is kind of tough right now. We're seeing where you don't do the in-residence as much, so you don't get a lot of that. How do I say
Training?
Training.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not sitting there with other members from different career fields and having to really talk about time management and talk about how they handle their tasks. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like the one symptom of this overactive mind, especially, well, I can only speak for myself, and I know I'm not that unique, but it would be keeping myself up at night. And, one of the things that you mentioned with the making lists or notes, that's something that I've relied heavily on. But even then, I'm just really not the best at times. And for me, I'll be up at night thinking about, again, scenarios. I don't know if it's a maintenance career, I guess, symptom, but I also run through scenarios, hypotheticals, and I've also wondered that as well because, coming from PMAL and having a tedious, well, I would say it is pretty tedious, and it's also, how would you say, you're married to checklist and you're married to process. So I always wondered if that translated. I don't recall myself being that way when I was younger, but still struggling at night, running through these scenarios and having this overactive mind that just would not shut off. And to this day, I still struggle with it. Actually, just last night, I was thinking about our podcast episode today, kind of like running through scenarios of like what would be really great for our audience to hear. But, over time, like you had mentioned, I do implement the note taking and making checklists. I think that has come to help. But the biggest part is getting that right mindset and recognizing, like, can you speak to how you were able to recognize how you had to come up with a process or had, to rely on note taking or making checklists for yourself? Like, can you speak to that a little bit?
So I kind of found that transition probably in the last like 2-3 years because I used to kind of like fast and loose do everything. It was it's not that I wasn't organized or anything like that. Like I did have like, I would track everything and put things in Excel sheets and Word documents and, things like that. But when it came to actually assigning like my time, I never really factored into I need to have family time. I need to have me time. I need to have, work time. I literally looked at every day as like, okay, this is an opportunity to get more tasks done altogether. So, I mean, I didn't mind if I was here at 5 o'clock in the morning and then leaving at 8 o'clock at night and then just let's start right back over again the next day. And then even when I got home, like, I'd still be going through scenarios and checklists. And I think to like touch on what you talked about too is I feel that it's not necessarily just like a maintenance thing or an intel thing. I think it's a military thing because we're naturally being trained to become leaders, to become problem solvers, to like find the solutions to problems. And depending on like the environment of your work center, it's really going to determine like, how much of that is embedded in your everyday life. I mean, like how many things are you having to figure out on your own, and how many things are you actually being like mentored or taught? So I found from like the way that we used to be as an organization, a lot of the discovery on that was on the individual. There was definitely like mentoring on your job and mentoring to make sure you're okay as a person. But like as far as like the expansion and like, your future and like, where to focus a lot of that, like, it's very difficult because each person's individual and like, to like really focus down on like each individual person and give them like a path of like, hey, these are the things that you should be focusing on. And I mean, don't get me wrong, there is so much doctrine and so much guidance out there that is trying to lead us down that road. But it's very saturated. There's a lot of it, there's it's a lot to take in. And that, I can recognize that myself now, like after looking at it on years. And so for me, like to get back to like where you were. So for me, like about 2-3 years ago, what I started finding myself having to kind of self-assess is, okay, so I really don't sleep much. I now deal with like, some physical effects of that because of, you just don't heal when you don't sleep,
Right.
and for me, my norm is like, I at times was only getting like 2-3 hours of sleep a night. Sometimes I'd be up for multiple days. And, but my peers and everyone else around me thought I was the overactive person. Like I talk a lot or I'm always on the move and I'm always jogging and I'm always, so that was my norm. That, not to say that my norm was healthy.
Right.
So I started seeing like, some of the physical things as far as like, I have back issues and, all kinds of things like that from like, just not healing, carrying stress in my, my shoulders, my back. So what I really started doing is just like doing that self-assessment of like, okay, so what is going to make me be able to take this task or take this thing that I'm thinking about at night and be able to put it to bed so I can go to bed. And that's where you really have to commit. So it's not just, I used to like take notes or make lists, and it was just kind of like, okay, this is good, and that gives me something to cross off and all that. I really had to like mentally commit to those tasks, commit to those lists, commit to the fact that I'm going to write this down. I know I'm going to have time for this, and selling to yourself like the urgency behind those tasks, and that they're
Right.
not like, no one's dying because you didn't get like a checklist out that day, especially when it didn't need to apply to that day. It's something that we have a deadline farther down the road, and for some people, like they need to timeline it out, like in their checklist, like and that might help them too. It's like to really break it down, but also not to invest too much time into that process, because you could spend as much time on a task coming up with a checklist for it of like, hey, I'm going to do it later, as actually just getting the task done.
Yeah.
And it took a while. It probably took me like a good 6 months to a year to get like a good system down for myself. And like you're still going to hit hiccups. Like I went probably about 6 months of actually sleeping well, like 7 to 8 hours of sleep, which was the first time in like a decade for me, the last 6 months. And then this Monday, I had the overactive mind thing again. I couldn't cut out the, just hypotheses like popping into my head. So I was up until 3:30, woke up at 5:30, ready to rock again. And, it's like that muscle memory of my body just being like used to, hey, you don't need sleep, you just keep going. So, I mean, like it finally last night, like, I got 7 hours of sleep again, like, so getting back on the track. And I think that kind of feeds into like, where you're going to go next with like, how to like ground yourself and center. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's also important to note, like, and you had touched on it, that accountability, because we have to be personally accountable to ourselves, because at the end of the day, like, we all support a mission and we have to be physically fit. And all of this ties into our whole holistic airman, our whole well-being. You mentioned sleep. Sleep is such a major component when you're talking about physical health and mental health. And I just had a thought and I lost it. But basically what I was getting at with the accountability is that this is a practice. And like you had said, there are times where there are hiccups. But if we can go back to that practice, if we can figure out like how that works for us as individuals, obviously. But some things do run true through us as, humans, but figure out what that process is or that practice is, and then staying true to it and stay committed to that process. And I think that the fruits of your labors are like how productive you are and maintaining the task that you're responsible for, or being able to be a contributor to mission or otherwise. I know when I've suffered, or like I mentioned before, I don't have it down pat just yet myself with overactive mind, coming in and being foggy headed, or having someone approach me with something, spontaneous at the moment, and I'm kind of not as quick, or how would you say, not quick to respond, but maybe just not on my A game. And I know that whenever I have that rest, or if I don't have that overactive mind keeping me up at night or bogging me down, and I'm prioritizing, like you had mentioned before, I think that's a big factor too, is prioritizing the things that are on our mind and knowing the timeliness. We can talk about time management, how that pieces into it, but I think that's kind of what we've alluded to here in this conversation. But prioritizing our time and making sure that we're not bogging down on the little things. I think that, I just honed in on what you had said, and that really stuck out for me, because that's something that I'm really trying to continue for myself. But yes, so now that you mentioned it, let's talk a little bit about mindfulness, because, with overactive mind, that's kind of like the solution is to practice mindfulness and to understand what mindfulness is, and being able to ground ourselves and center ourselves and kind of do the things that we've already instilled for ourselves, which again, no miracle, it's kind of similar, like with the checklist and things like that. So how have you become aware of mindfulness? Was it through the Air Force, or was this like a self-discovery for you?
So for me, it came from some reading. Social intelligence is actually like one of my favorite books. They also have emotional intelligence and all that. So really like focusing on because like for me, this is something I hadn't touched on either. Like I have an issue with like emotions, and like I have to like really focus hard on like noticing and being empathetic to others, because I don't really like process a lot of things. It's like a desensitization. So focusing on like other people's cues and other people's like the way they like what's a normal way to react to something. So for me, like it came through a lot of reading, conversations with other members, and then like also like talking to doctors and things like that. To kind of like find that like that how to like get that mindfulness and how to like center yourself, and like you'll hear terms a lot, and I'm sure you'll cover it over time. And Jill Garvin has a lot of information on it too, about like grounding yourself and like really being able to like tell like that you're in the here and the now. And because what happens with me at night is I'm not in the now when I'm trying to go to sleep. I'm in the future. I'm in the past, and I'm definitely doing discovery of those events. Like I'm doing discovery of like hey, did I do this correctly, or did I make the right decision the other day on this, or years back, or so on. And it's getting stuck in that trap of woulda, coulda, shoulda. But then also jumping into the future and talking about, well, now based on that information, this is how I'm going to do things in the future.
Yes.
And like, this is how I would have handled that situation. And hey, if this, it sounds obscure to people probably that don't have an overactive mind, or that just, my wife actually, she can just fall asleep, the second her head hits the pillow. It could be 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock at night, and she's just out. And like, I envy that. But, so for someone that doesn't deal with that, like, just to give you like an idea, like I literally go through, I've had conversations with people that probably will never happen in my head, because it's like prepping myself and being prepared for every possible solution that can happen. And again, that's just part of having that overactive mind, is you're always preparing, always trying to be ready for what's coming. And there are just some things that you have to, that's a good thing to be vigilant, but sometimes hypervigilancy, especially like here stateside, it can be draining on you mentally, physically, and all around. So how I deal with it though, I have a couple of like grounding techniques that I do for myself. So one of them, like a lot of physical therapists, like, have you do this or for either meditation or yoga, just kind of like, starting from like your head and working your way down. Like, like, hey, is my temple tight? Like, I feel like I'm like, squinting or doing something like that. Is my jaw loose? Like, because people grind their teeth, and work your way down to your shoulders. And like, again, like that's where I mentioned earlier, like me, my shoulders, my back, when I get focusing on something, even my breathing, like I'll stop breathing or focusing on breathing. I'll find myself like taking deep inhales, because I was so focused on trying to get a task done or thinking about something and typing at the same time, and trying to do all that, like everything all at once, that like you're not noticing your basic motor functions.
I've been there.
So like just work your way down to like your toes. So like for example, like the last 2 nights, that Monday, Tuesday, where I didn't sleep, was going through those things, and I couldn't get myself to like focus. But last night I did that whole thing, and I noticed that it was actually my legs. I was like tensing my legs and like making my feet stick straight up, like and it was just one of those things that like once I got to that, like I just felt like the rest of my body just go like, oh, okay, now we can let go, and we're not on alert, and just go to sleep.
Yeah, you explained having your mind full, whether it's of conversation, hypotheticals, or task. A lot of times, I find myself, I think more lately than before, it's more task oriented, and we all have a lot on our plate, and that prioritization comes into play there. But you were talking about your methods, and one of the things that has helped me, especially at night, is I will open my eyes and look around my bedroom and realize that there is absolutely nothing that I can do in the moment to contribute to the things that are on my mind, and to be at peace with being in a home, feeling warm, and like recentering myself to focus on what I have in the moment. And I think that's the biggest piece for everyone to take from this conversation, is to be able to center yourself, ground yourself. And we all have our techniques. You mentioned breathing, yoga, And, you know, a lot of times it's, I think, instinctual or subconscious, but again, it's that effort and that accountability piece is like when we can recognize when we're at peace, being able to carry that forward and continue to practice it. I think that's the biggest hurdle for a lot of us is being consistent. And I think that's where I personally run into those hiccups where I'm like, okay, I know what to do, but I don't want to do it. And there are times where I generally do ignore the fact that I should be more centered. And I just allow myself to really dive into these scenarios or these tasks where I need to prioritize. Yeah, I think that, you know, with great practice, you know, a lot of times you can benefit in the long run by not having these moments where you're foggy headed or not productive. So you are a parent. So how do you translate that into that realm of your life? Or like, do your kids struggle with it? Or is this something like you said your wife doesn't necessarily struggle with this, but
Yeah, my daughter does a little bit because she basically ends up like she's very active and like, you know, loves animals and all this stuff. So and she's 10, so she like gets on like these tangents and like just can't let go of like, you know, certain like, you know, focuses and like, you know, I mean, like, and you see that in kids anyways, like, you know, they like, no, I have to tell you this thing. I really have to tell you this thing. It's like they're going to explode if they don't like get this piece of information out to you. And it ends up being like, I'm going to go upstairs, you know, like, you know, but like it takes them, you know, 20 minutes to get to that point to tell you that that's what they were going to do. You know, that's what I really had to tell you about, you know, that's the urgency. You know, so like for me, that transition, again, like, you know, to try to stay away from career field stuff, it can be tough for like any of us, like, you know, you're at work, you're having your focuses, and then like, you know, how do you turn off that light switch and go home and like let that be home?
yeah.
And I still struggle with that, and I think that's something that is very hard to do as time goes on and as like, you know, you get to different roles in like your career. I mean, like being a volunteer victim advocate, like, you know, you'll have a phone with you, and so it's awfully hard to not be like semi-alert, like, you know, because like at any moment that phone could ring. Same with like, you know, depending on what your job is, if you could be on call. I mean, like, you know, some people don't even think about like, you know, CE or some of those guys that like, or guys and girls, like, you know, snow's coming and like there's a lot of people that are going to be operating plow trucks and all that stuff, and their whole life is on the mercy of like, is there a snowstorm coming, and like, you know, trying to plan family like that. So but like you know, for me it's about like literally trying to like tell my brain like, hey, okay, just focus on, you have family, and focus on like, you know, them and their lives. And for me, the best way to do that is like, I really try to drive that conversation at home. Like, you know, the second I get home, and like, you know, if the kids are already home or my wife's already home, starting like those probing questions into them, like, you know, and that like can draw my focus away from like whatever might have still been lingering on my head.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, how was your day at, like, you know, school? How was your day at work? You know, what was your favorite part? And like, you know, it not only does that foster you, you know, being able to let go yourself, it's also going to foster that, like, now you're involved, like, you know, in their lives, and they recognize you're there. Because I can only imagine, like, when I was really, like, crazy overactive mind, like, probably, like, 6-7 years ago, I mean, like, there wasn't probably more than, like, a couple hours, like, a week that I wasn't somewhere else in my head. Like, you know, I was always, you know, thinking about something work-wise or thinking about something process-wise, and not really enjoying like my home and my family and all that.
Yeah, you know, I made the joke recently that I always have like multiple browsers open in my head.
Yeah.
But I mentioned your daughter because, you know, this is what I've heard from other parents is that kids, and you know, you had mentioned a little bit on like when you feel like your mind became more overactive and you connect it with service, and I cannot disagree with you with that. But a lot of parents have said their kids are, you know, they're more mindful of being in the moment and being present and really taking in an experience. And I wonder, you know, sometimes this is me going, you know, a little overactive mind, but I wonder at what point in our lives did that change, or when that switch, you know, happened. And I just had to ask because I'm not a parent myself, and I know a lot of our audience, they're parents, like if they can recognize that in their children, or how they are able to like kind of steer them in a path of kind of guiding them to be mindful or continuing with their mindfulness and not being full with their overactive mind.
Yeah, I mean, like with my daughter, like we're involved in the school too. So like and like so that like well, trying to like have the same language like when we talk to the school and when we talk to our daughter, like
Yeah.
and I think that just it really comes down to like if you're looking to do that, like just being involved, being involved and especially if you're so if in this situation, like if you're concerned, like as a parent, that like some of those traits you're seeing them in your children, like that's really the best thing because like kids are sponges and like habits are formed at those younger
Right.
ages. So like that's like the best time to like if you're seeing some of those traits too, and it's difficult because like I mean like to really like get a scope on are you that overactive person translating that onto your family or translating that onto
Right.
your children. Yeah, I mean like for me it's like I'm doing multiple things at the same time. So even when I had the active mind, I was like paying attention to what they were doing. It was just kind of like how we're talking right now. I would be thinking about 10 other things while I'm trying to have that conversation. So it's,
Yeah.
so I like, I was keeping an eye on it back then. But at the time I wasn't recognizing overactive mind or, I was just in it. Like, that was my life. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I really want to thank you for taking the time today and coming in to speak on, overactive mind and mindfulness. I think that our wing could benefit from having these conversations amongst each other and just listening to how we're speaking about it. Hopefully, will encourage others to come out and speak about it. And if anyone needs help, obviously, Miss Jill Garvin is always available to them. Our first sergeants, first line supervisors, myself.
I'm open. Yeah.
I was going to say, I'm sure
Yeah.
you are too. So thank you for contributing to the unity within the 102nd community. I look forward to having you on again sometime in the future. And for those of you listening and wish to contribute to an episode of the Warrior Airman Podcast, please reach out to me via Outlook email or my personal email at mandy.givens@yahoo.com. I look forward to hearing from you. Take care.